Welcome everyone to the State of Ads.txt adoption webinar. We'll be talking about some of the work that we've done around supply chain validation and validating some of our standards. Today we have Shaili Singh, who's the SVP of Product at the Tech Lab, and Jill Whitcup, who's the Director of Product for Software at the Tech Lab, and myself. I lead our programmatic initiatives at the Tech Lab. The agenda for today, I'll start off with a brief introduction about the Tech Lab. We'll talk about some of our sell-side transparency standards, why we need supply chain validation, and then we will transition on to talking about in more detail about the supply chain validation service that we have been working on. And then we'll get into some of the results, some of the important results that we're seeing by the data analysis that we've been doing within this tool. And then finally we'll end with some of the key takeaways and recommended actions for the group. First, I want to do a quick brief overview of the Tech Lab. I suspect that most of the folks on this webinar might be aware of the Tech Lab, but for those who are new, what we are is we're a global we're a nonprofit organization, and we are a global organization, and we engage with the member community across the globe to develop some of the foundational technologies that really enable the growth of the digital media ecosystem, and we do that by engaging with our members throughout the globe, and also some of the local IABs across the globe. And we build and we work on some of these shared resources and technologies, in addition to the standards that really drive the ad tech ecosystem. And a big part of it is really to build the trust within the supply chain, so that everybody in the supply chain is a little more confident about what they're seeing and what they're buying. And you may already have seen some of this work. I like to say that we are responsible for a lot of the abbreviation soup that we have in the ad tech industry, but really it is really the foundation, the plumbing that our industry runs on, a whole wide array of standards, whether we're talking about OpenRTB, VAST, CIMID, open measurement. It's a whole set of things that we have been developing over the last few years. Today, we're going to focus on two of the things that you see highlighted there, Ads.txt and sellers.json. And again, these are two standards these are two of the standards that have probably been the most widely adopted and probably have had the fastest adoption because of the value that people are seeing for those standards. I want to start off with a brief background about some of the sell-side transparency standards that we worked on. This gives the bigger picture of the various efforts that we have either completed or are ongoing. Ads.txt and APAC.txt and that is the key focus area for today's conversation. Ads.txt basically lists out all the authorized sellers for a publisher or an app developer's inventory. That's a key and the main focus of that standard, and it provides that level of transparency to the ecosystem so that people can confirm that, hey, when I'm trying to buy inventory from a particular publisher or an app developer, I'm buying it through channels that the publisher has authorized. Sellers.json is the next standard that we released, and that following up on Ads.txt, and kind of gives the other view of the supply chain, right? So basically, it is intended to reveal for the intermediaries what their relationship is with the publishers or other entities in the ecosystem. And then the third part that we released, the third piece that we released along the same lines was supply chain object, which is an update to the, unlike the first two, which are basically files which the entities publish to explain their relationships. Supply chain object is something that goes along with the actual transaction. right? So and this can be done in OpenRTB itself, but it can also be used in non-OpenRTB context too. Basically, it is intended to list all the entities that are involved in that particular transaction. So as a transaction goes through the various hops to complete that, it basically allows for those entities to say, hey, I was involved with this transaction, and to provide that level of transparency around what is involved with that particular transaction. The last part that, and this is something that we are working on right now, is Ads.cert. It is intended to really validate validate the contents and the identities of the people who are involved in a transaction. So basically, we are working on using cryptographic technologies so that to identify who the entities are involved in a transaction, and that can be either that covers a range of things, whether it's for the bid requests, for the billing notifications, and so on. And then the next part is to actually start encrypting the payload so that we can validate whether that payload has been modified or not. So that's the last piece in the story that we are working on right now. Getting a little deeper into Ads.txt, this is how a typical Ads.txt file. This is what it looks like. The publisher basically defines the set of entities that they are doing business with, and the kind of relationships that they have with those entities. So basically, as you can see, it lists out the entity name, the seat ID that's involved, and the relationship, whether it's a direct or a reseller. The sellers.json file is for the intermediaries, for the transactional systems, to basically talk about their relationship with the other side of the publisher. And again, it's kind of it's almost a mirror, if you will, of this thing, though it's not exactly that. I will say. I think the goals were slightly different, and so it's not exactly the same. And we will talk about that a little bit as we get into the validation service some more. But basically, it is intended to define the relationship with the publisher coming in from the platform side. And how does all this fit together? This slide kind of goes over the flow, if you will, of these various standards and all across the different entities involved. You have the publisher defining the Ads.txt files. You have the SSPs and all the other intermediaries defining their sellers.json files. And then you have the DSP, which is going to, and you have the supply chain object being added to a particular transaction. And then all this, typically what you see is that the Ads.txt, the sellers.json files, all of those are collected within an aggregator. And we do provide an aggregator, though there are other aggregators out there in the world as well. And those aggregators basically allow for the DSPs to quickly take a look at the actual entries within the Ads.txt file without having to go on a real-time basis, go and query those files. And so basically that allows for a much faster processing and allows for that real-time transaction to happen. In addition to that, you could also have other trust sources, trust data sources, as I call them. An example would be something like TAG or the local media consortium. Other entities, other lists that you might want to check to confirm, okay, are these, again, entities that you really are going to be transacting with. And typically all this information gets reconciled. It also gets should get validated, and that's one of the things that we are going to talk about now, and then passed along to the DSP for the actual the final transaction. In addition to that, the information that's gathered can also be sent into a supply chain object database or cache or what have you, to really understand, okay, how does the actual supply chain look, and are there optimization paths that can be optimizations that can be performed. So that kind of is the nice picture that we were trying to build out. But we did run into over the last couple of years, as we have seen this set of standards implemented. And when I say that implemented, Ads.txt is implemented by millions of publishers. Sellers.json has also been implemented by hundreds of the platforms. And so it is one of those things which is has been implemented pretty well, but there have been hiccups, there have been questions that and some confusion as well because of some of the mismatches that people may have been seeing. And so let's talk about that for a couple of minutes. So I think it started off with a lot of buzz around, okay, publishers need to adopt Ads.txt. I think the initial adoption curve went by the ask that, hey, publishers should be adopting Ads.txt, and that actually got caught on pretty quick because the buyers immediately saw the value of getting this information, and so publishers really did start picking it up because the buyers were asking for that information to be provided. But then it quickly transitioned on to the publishers really need to clean up their Ads.txt files. Clearly, there was a lot of copy and paste kind of efforts going on, and it's clear that in many cases the Ads.txt files that we were seeing were not exactly correct, and there was a lot of there were errors that people were seeing as well in in the actual values too. And then the next thing that happened was that really people again realized that, okay, not just having the Ads.txt is probably not sufficient. Really need to have the sellers.json side of things implemented as well. At which point they also realized that, hey, maybe they actually need to start getting that reconciliation going better. There is a lot of mismatch. And that mismatch is actually a lot of things, is what's driving a lot of the current conversations around mislabeling inventory. The MethBot was one of the schemes that was that found that there are a lot of challenges around the actual values that are there in the Ads.txt files, and a lot of it is really a lot of the concern that you can see that around this is driven by the fact that we have all these bad Ads.txt entries. You have entries that don't really match what's there on the sellers.json, and that is causing a lot of confusion, and really is and that fear that the values may not be correct is something that is causing a lot of lack of confidence really in the whole supply chain and in the transparency efforts that we have going. And that is and the other part really is oops, sorry, that build out didn't come out right. Okay, and the other part really is that there is, like I said, some mismatch between what the Ads.txt entries are and what the sellers.json entries are. There's some confusion about exactly what should be used, and our friends at sellers.guide have I thought put together this nice little infographic that talks about, okay, what values should you be using. But clearly that is something that is not that has been causing a lot of problems, and that's the reason why we figured that, hey, it's time for us to provide a useful tool to the industry that can be used to address some of these challenges around incorrect values, around mismatched entries, and so on. And that's where that's what we'll talk about next. And I'll bring in Jill to talk to that.
Great, thanks, Amit. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the service that we built, so a supply chain validation service, and we'll go through a little bit. Amit did a really nice job setting up what the problem was and what we think we have to present as a solution. Next slide, please. So just over a month ago, we launched the supply chain validation service. And this is really, as Amit said, managing your ads.txt file and its relationship to sellers.json files is a big responsibility. It's something that publishers need to be aware of how they're being represented in sellers.json files, because at the end of the day, it can have impacts when buying systems have their own, have rules in place to potentially filter out mismatches. So I don't know that that's something that publishers are able to do on a regular basis, as in they check each entry of their ads.txt file against the relevant seller's JSON file entry and make sure that it meets their expectation. It's possible, obviously, those files are all public, but it is it's a big job. Some ads.txt files are quite long, and honestly, it should be done on a regular basis. Weekly is what we've started with. So we've designed a software that does this programmatically and presents sort of the results to the subscriber, so that they can see everything in sort of one easy to read location, and have a better understanding of sort of which entries need some work, which ones they should just spot check because we're unable to fully programmatically validate them, and then which ones are incorrect that they need to sort of talk to their partners about. And we'll send email notifications to those subscribers, sort of letting them know on that regular basis about how, if there are new changes, because like I said, it's the first time that someone goes through the validation, the first one will probably have sort of the most notifications, but then after that, it is a regular sort of security check just to make sure that nothing's changed on your partner side, or if you add new entries that you're able to continually validate those as well. Sorry, next slide on it. And so we've designed just over 20 test cases, and we've broken those down. So I'll call them notifications because everything is presented as a notification, and everything has a unique notification code. And so there's we think there's a lot of value in having those unique codes, because that means that this 6-digit code will mean a specific thing to sort of everyone, and we've published what all of those definitions are for what the test case is, what the expected result is, and then what the code is. And then we've broken the codes down into 2 buckets. We have both error codes and alert codes. And so error codes are, they are what they sound like, they're errors. The results don't match what we expect. They don't match the published specifications. Some of the examples here are, some of the basics, like if the ads.txt or seller's JSON file doesn't exist, those are error codes. Or if the ads.txt file doesn't have at least one valid entry. I think it was in March 2020, a new sort of specification went into effect for how we want the no authorized sellers file to be presented. So if that's not met, there is an error there. Some of the other sort of pieces, if there's from the ads.txt file sort of basic specifications, the allowed number of external and internal redirects for where the file is hosted, those types of things would come through as errors. But then we have the second bucket, which is alerts. And these are things that at Tech Lab, we're not able to fully programmatically validate. There's basically more than one right answer. And what we're doing in that case is that we are highlighting those cases in sort of an easy to read format for the subscriber, and really making sure that that those are presented to the subscriber and they can take easy actions and sort of approve if it's something that meets their expectation, or they can work with their partners if it doesn't sort of meet their expectations. The best example of that you'll see a lot through here is we have a specific error or a specific alert notification for domain matching. And that's between, so the domain that the ads.txt file is listed on, and then the domain that's listed in the seller's JSON file. We are flagging that as an alert just because we think it's important for the publisher, the subscriber, to know how they're being listed in the seller's JSON file. But they're by no means meant to be the exact same all the time. I mean, if they are the same, that's fine. It's the domain that the ads.txt file is on, and then the domain in seller's JSON is meant to be the sort of the business domain that's being paid for the inventory. And so sometimes they are the same, but sometimes they're not. And when they're not, that's fine. It could be a parent company, it could be some sort of setup like that. But we just want to make sure that we're flagging, hey, this is the domain that the seller has you listed as. Do you know this domain? Like, does it make sense? And then when you see that, you can sort of tell us, yes, that's fine, and move on from that alert. But I will say that alert is the one that comes up most frequently, just because we're, it's a common scenario, and we are expecting that to come up. It's not, and that's why I'm trying to highlight that the alerts aren't necessarily the worst thing in the world. They're more just for your review. Next slide, please. And so the basics of how we broke down those test cases. So we did sort of a set of cases around direct entries. So this is about the validation takes place for each entry within your Ads.txt file. And so we look at and run a set of test cases on the direct seller, data validation, resellers, all the reseller entries. And then we'll look at the basics on the Ads.txt and Ads.txt files. So just making sure that the files meet basic specifications. And then, like I said before, providing that unique code, unique notification code for each error or alert that we see, with sort of a brief description of why we're flagging it and what the suggested next steps should be. And then for some of those alerts specifically, there is that ability to approve some legitimate scenarios that meet your needs. And this is just an example of what that sort of looks like. So if I'm going from left to right here, so the publisher, I just did a blank example. So domain.com, we're looking at a direct relationship here, and the advertising system listed as system.com. And so you can see in the notification codes that we have that 12030. And so that's the specific notification code for the example I previously gave, where the publisher domain does not match the domain listed in the seller's JSON file. But as you can see, I have the publisher domain listed as domain.com, and then the seller's JSON domain listed as company.com, which is sort of the most common example in which it's a parent company and a property that they own. And then you can see that there can be more than one notification code per row. So in this case, we have 2 notification codes flagged. And then the second code is doing a relationship validation. So in this case, the Ads.txt relationship is listed as direct, and the seller's JSON is listed as intermediary. And then we have, sort of an overview saying that in most cases, direct relationships would be paired with publisher relationships and seller's JSON. But in this case, it's an alert again. There are valid use cases for the direct intermediary pairing. And we're just asking the publisher to sort of take another look, review, and make sure that it does meet their expectations. And as I said before, all of the test cases, so all of those notification codes are detailed with what we're looking for, sort of what's in the specification, what we're testing, what the expected result is, and then what those notification codes are, and whether we're classifying it as an alert or error. And that is in the link that you see. It's published on the Tech Lab website too, on the supply chain validation page. Next slide, please. And I'll go through a couple of these in detail. This goes through the 20 test cases, but I want to highlight a few of them just to kind of make sure that you guys understand the depth. This is an example, like I said, scenario, expected result, notification message, type, and code. And so some basic starting points for, does the file exist? Correct content type. Can we access the file without timeouts? The number, like I said, of redirects allowed per the specification, both internal root domain redirects and external domain redirects. And all of those, as you can see in the far right corner, have an individual notification code. In this case, they're all error codes, because a lot of these are they're sort of basic standards that we need to make sure that we're able to read the file. Next slide. And then some of these I think are, I mean, as Amit described, these are public files that a lot of people are doing some copy and paste maintenance on. And unfortunately, that means that there can be, frankly, typos. And so we have some test cases here checking for sort of some of the most common typos that we've seen. Things like not having the 2 commas per line indicating the 3 required fields, or not having either direct or reseller listed in that 3rd field. Some people miss typos, like there's typos. Some people accidentally put in the seller's JSON definitions. or mix match between the two. So there's just some basic maintenance and things that we can catch in that validation. And I'll move ahead on to some of the more interesting ones. Next slide, please. So then these are some of the test cases that look at that relationship status. So the first few that we went through, we're looking mostly at the file itself. Does it exist? Is it to specification? And then these are more looking along the relationship validation. So going out to find the seller's JSON files and then see if you are listed and represented in that seller's JSON file as expected. And so you know, we do this separately for their different, they're similar test cases, but different codes for direct versus reseller entries. So all of these that I'm looking at right now, we're going through our direct entry scenarios. And so we're checking to make sure that the seller's JSON file exists, that if the file exists, the identifier that you published as the account ID is in the seller ID or is in the seller's file as the seller ID. And then we're presenting you with the information that's linked to that seller ID. So in that case, the domain that's listed and the relationship type are the key sort of attributes that we're focused on. Next slide. And then there is a whole set again for the reseller test cases. I won't go through each of these in detail. They're very similar in nature to the direct entries, but they're looking for, you know, different results within the relationship side. So you can see like the test case 19 here for each reseller entry. It's checking to see if the seller ID has the entry listed as intermediary. And so if it's listed as both, that's flagged as an alert. That's potentially fine. That's a valid case. We're just unable to sort of programmatically know the difference. That would be something the publisher would need to validate. And then the other one that we have listed as an error is actually if the reseller is listed as a publisher. So to flag that for the publisher to sort of understand and have a conversation with their selling partner about why they're listing as intermediary and their partner is listing as a publisher relationship. Next slide. And then we do have a couple of test cases regarding subdomains and the way that they are included within the Ads.txt file. So the first sort of thing to look at is just is the subdomain listed a valid URL? And then the second thing we look at is if the subdomain is actually a valid subdomain of the root domain that the file is listed on. And then another thing that I haven't listed here that we're looking into is the for subdomains is looking at making sure that the subdomains that are requested to be crawled are actually listed in the root domain's Ads.txt file. So we should be able to go to the root domain file and look for the subdomains that are meant to be crawled and sort of meet that redirect, sort of follow that path through to the correct subdomains that have sort of their own authorized sellers. But we don't always find that to be the case. So that's another test case that we're actually adding. Next slide. And so that's it for what we built and the test cases. Again, those are all published on the Tech Lab website and will be included in the slides. There are a couple links there. And I will pass it over to Shaylee to talk through the analysis that we did.
All right, thank you, Jill, for that great overview. And before we start the analysis, I also want to thank Jill again for taking on this task early in the year and building out the system, defining all the use cases, working with a lot of you to get there. And Mayank, who's our head of engineering, and the rest of our engineering team to actually build this, as well as OpenX, who's one of our board members, and their team has pitched in with helping build the crawler that we're using for this. So what we did was we, like Amit explained earlier, like there were these a lot of these published reports about issues with Ads.txt, but what we felt was, and then we really appreciate those researchers and others taking a look at these files and shining a light on the state of the implementations. But a lot of them were looking at slices of inventory of what was of interest to them. So we decided to kind of aggregate everything, take an overall look at how deep or how extent these problems are. So that's the analysis that I'm going to present. That we looked at a few million websites and a few 100,000 apps that we crawled, we analyzed based on our supply chain validation service and the test cases that Jill went through. And this is the analysis of that. Next slide, please. So the first thing, of course, we did was like look at the basic specification validation, which are typically errors, and they kind of would render an ads.txt entries unusable. So we found that ads.txt files were pretty much okay. They were like they were in the range of 5% or under for most part with these kind of errors. But app.ads.txt files had a much more significant error rate on basic match with the specification and the validation. So if you look at this graph, like content type, 29% of the app.ads.txt files that we found did not have the right content type. 50% did not have the right formatting in terms of how many commas should be there, which causes a big problem for anybody trying to use this file. The parser can make mistakes in understanding the data and basically return garbage. The missing relationships was another problem. We did not find valid ad system domains that were specified in the ads.txt files, and so on. So the net takeaway from this was that app.ads.txt or mobile publishers need to do a lot more work to fix their ads.txt files. Next one. The next, we looked at like overall, the whole universe, like at least the one that we crawled, is how many files are clean, like absolutely clean, that they can be trusted and people can use them. So what we found was like 63% of ads.txt files had 0 errors, which is great. Like this is a very good number for reliability purposes. And then about 48% was the number for app.ads.txt. So again, we see that app.ads.txt is again lower here. And then when we look at, so this is the other thing, like we looked at domains overall, which have the files. Then we also looked at, because each file has like multiple entries, so each file could have like 20, 30, 40 entries. So we also looked at like how many of these entries or each line item or each declaration by a publisher of authorized seller, where does that stand? And that number was a little lower than what at least I was expecting. So if you look at this number, like only 34% of the entries in ads.txt files had no errors or alerts. And then we'll get into a little bit more detail on where this data is coming from. And similarly, like app.ads.txt's number was 40%. So less than half of the files are absolutely clean. Next slide, please. The other one that we looked at was like our test cases, as you saw, are divided into 2 categories: direct sellers analysis and then the reseller analysis. So we looked at all the entries that had direct relationship was declared as direct by the publisher. And this is the result of that analysis. It's not insignificant numbers, but it's not too high an error rate if you look at it. The things that we found that we can infer from this is that all sellers have not yet adopted sellers.json files. The mismatch of domain, that's the last columns that you see with 17% for ads.txt and 13% for app.ads.txt. This is something that we expect, and that's why it's a high number. And that's one of the things that we allow, as we will go through it later, that can be fixed. The no sellers.json number is also there. Like there's still a lot of sellers out there who've not yet uploaded their sellers.json file, or have not uploaded in the right place, or have not fully disclosed all of the relationships. And then, of course, these are the top 4 errors that are found. There were others which were much lesser numbers or insignificant numbers. The other striking thing was like the account ID not matching between the account ID or the seat ID that's declared in the publisher's Ads.txt versus what's put up in the sellers.json file. So again, here we see that Ads.txt has a much higher number, and this kind of renders that line item not usable, that the account IDs don't match, then it's not a valid relationship. Next slide, please. So similarly, the reseller analysis, and this is interesting, like moment you get into a reseller relationship, the number of errors are much more significant and much higher, both for Ads.txt and sellers.json. So like account ID does not match, almost doubles. The relationship mismatches also are much higher. And then again, the sellers.json not being found or not present is much higher. And similarly, the domain mismatch is kind of at the same level, this is coming from basically the definition of the 2 files. In the Ads.txt, the publisher is basically declaring who's authorized to sell. And then the sellers.json, it's more about who they are paying. So it's possible like a company has like 5 different sites. So each of those sites has an Ads.txt file, and but they all use the same account because with the ad system, because it's the same company that's getting paid, and that's where from the domain mismatches are occurring. So that's kind of interesting that the reseller is where there needs to be more work done and more scrutiny on whenever your buying path includes the resellers reselling the inventory. Next slide. So the key takeaways are, the first one is like there are syntactical and account mismatch errors or data errors, which are really easy to fix. Fixing the content type or the formatting of the file, the correct relationship declarations, and including valid domains and subdomains. That should be a pretty easy thing for all publishers to fix. So the subdomains is a low number, but also it is significantly high because very less number of files actually have subdomains declared. So we found like, people were pointing to other domains in the subdomains, which is not the definition of subdomain. And some of the subdomains declared were actually invalid, like there was no subdomain that existed on that site. The second one that we found, like second takeaway, was the reseller scenarios have significantly higher errors and alerts, mainly coming from like incorrect account IDs and no sellers.json. Those are the 2 like that accounted for the highest error rates in the reseller scenarios, which is again not too difficult to fix. Like you can correct your account IDs and sellers need to start putting up their sellers.json files. The third one is the relationship and the seller domain information. Like I explained, there's a difference between the definition of the 2 files. So this comes from there. And this one is the one that everyone needs to review and make sure that what is being represented or what is being put in those files is correct. Next slide. So these are some of the recommended actions. Publishers and owners of Ads.txt and Ads.txt files, they should make sure that they keep their account entries updated, verify the account information with the seller, verify their relationship declaration with the seller, and of course confirm the formatting as per the specification. On the seller side, what they can do is make sure that the publisher relationship is correctly reflected, ensure that the entries reflect the business that you actually pay, and then, of course, implement your sellers.json file, especially for the mobile app inventory sellers. It's a pretty high number that we were not able to find the sellers.json file for Ads.txt entries. On the buyer side, is use validated information to make your media buying policies. Ask your DSPs or buying vendors to apply your policies in the buying process and use validated Ads.txt data. Just the mere presence of an Ads.txt or a sellers.json is not sufficient. It is necessary, but not sufficient. So please ensure that you're enforcing these policies, and then ask the sellers and publishers to update and correct their Ads.txt and sellers.json files. With all of this, that was the purpose of the supply chain validation service, to help publishers, sellers, and buyers with the right, providing the right information and being able to keep all of this information and in these files updated. So next slide, please. So how this service can help is publishers, if they sign up for the supply chain validation service, they will get regular email notifications for alerts and alerts. And they would also have the option to fix the or approve the alerts. So I have an example of this data on the right side of how this data would get represented and how a publisher can come in. And, this is the example of a domain mismatch or a relationship declaration mismatch, and they can actually approve it. So then when somebody is using this data from our service, then they're assured that this has been approved by the publisher, and this is okay to use this line. And this is important because Ads.txt is a very simple specification, but when we did our research and talked to a lot of people, we realized that our industry is very vibrant, and there are a lot of different business scenarios and use cases that need to be addressed, and this is one way to address those legitimate business cases. The sellers and for the buyers, what we have is they will be able to also access all of this data. So publishers, when they sign up for this service, they'll be able to access their own data and be able to approve things and be able to look at the errors and alerts and be able to fix them. But for sellers and buyers, they will have to wait a little bit more as we launch the Transparency Center, where we will make this data available to all our members to view and look at, and also we'll have the APIs where they can ingest this data into their ad systems and use it for use the notification codes to inform their buying decisions and make actionable policies on top of that. Next slide. So yeah, that was the summary of all the analysis that we did, and you can of course sign up for this service at tools.ivtechlab.com/scv for supply chain validation. If you have questions while registering, please don't hesitate to send email to support@ivtechlab.com. We are also making this is a paid service, so we try to make it really as a low cost annual subscription for publishers to be able to easily sign up and use the service. We're also offering a discount code early59 for a $59 per year for the first year subscription. This code is valid until October 31, 2021. So we look forward to you availing the service, and hopefully we can bring those numbers down to number of errors and alerts down to 0 in the coming months. So we do have Q&A. So I'll go through this Q&A, and then between me, Jill, and Amit, we'll try to address these questions. So the first one is there a format that DSPs care more about having sellers.json implemented? sellers.json applies to any format. It doesn't differ. It's agnostic of the format. So a DSP should care about all of these formats.
Right.
The next one is, how do you assign a publisher name to a publisher ID? Jill, Amit, do you want to?
This is the seat ID on the platform, right? So it's not something that you would really it's something that they would work between the platform and the publisher to define that.
Yeah, so this is a declaration from the publisher. So it's not something that TechLab or anybody else signs. They should get it from the seller platform. They would all know this.
Right.
So the next one is there an example of a legitimate case where the seller is listed as reseller in Ads.txt and publisher is listed as intermediary in the sellers.json? Jill, I think this is your wheelhouse.
Well, I just wanted to highlight that is actually, I'm sorry if I misspoke anywhere in there, but that is the correct use case. So when reseller, we're checking first for intermediary in the seller's JSON. That is sort of the most expected, but the other correct one could be both. We're just unable to tell programmatically if the correct answer is intermediary or if it's both. So either one is okay.
So this case would not actually trigger an alert or anything. This is
correct.
The
that one would go
right
through.
use case.
Is the other one where it's said direct but then intermediary? That's the one that that could trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The next question is from Yale. Can the ads.txt exist only on domain.com ads.txt, or should it be at domain.com/ads.txt? I think both are correct, right? www should not make any difference.
So I do need to look at the specs again, but I think one is required, the other is optional. I'll need to check which one is what. I think if I'm right, domain.com is the one that is absolutely required, and the www is the optional.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Sahil. Is it possible to test the supply chain validator for some days for free? Jill?
Right now it's not. However, if you are interested in just like a high-level overview, reach out to the support email alias, so the support@iabtechlab.com, and I can work with you a little bit to give you some hints and give you an idea of what we're looking at there. But I don't have a way to run the service completely for free for a few days right now.
No, we do have that discount code that you can see there.
I did, Shaylee, I think we missed the previous one where were all regions included in these test cases. So I did want to highlight that we do crawl globally. So there are domains from all regions around the world included in the data set that we showed, but it's more challenging than expected to actually break it down by region. So we don't have a regional analysis available right now.
The next question is from Yale. Where in the ads.txt you define the seller type? I'm familiar with the direct and reseller on the ads.txt, not with the intermediary. You said you're comparing between both. Jill?
So the both that we're comparing between is the ads.txt file and the seller's JSON file. So as a publisher, you are responsible for the ads.txt file, and that does have the seller types direct and reseller. But then in your selling partner's seller's JSON files, there is another relationship declaration, and that can be intermediary, both, or publisher. And so when we say we're comparing between both, that's sort of the check that we're doing is looking at the ads.txt file compared to how the seller's JSON is listed.
Next one is a good question. Like, how do cases where a publisher declares a seller in their ads.txt and the entry for that publisher is missing from the sellers.json appear in the tool?
Can you go back 2 slides, Amit? Because the example Shaylee had in the tool. So what we do, okay, this one. If you can see just in the top right-hand corner here, I know it's kind of small, but we every entry in the ads.txt file is actually listed as a line within sort of the results of the tool. And so you can see that even like each line represents one entry in your ads.txt file. And then over on the far right-hand side, you can see those notification codes, and each one sort of has a little pop-up that comes to show you suggested next steps or describe what the notification code is. And you can see the data presented, like the relevant data attributes between the ads.txt file and the seller's JSON. And so in the case described here, where the publisher lists the seller and then the seller doesn't actually have that identifier in their seller's JSON file, it would still list out the entry from the ads.txt file. So it would show the domain, the advertising system, and the account ID. And then there would be, it basically show NA for the seller's JSON side, because they don't have that ID in their file. And then it would associate the relevant notification code, which would, I think is, I'm not going to guess, it's 13 something. So it would have that 6-digit code associated with it, and it would say, if you click on the code, what that we couldn't find your seller ID in the specified seller's JSON file.
Thank you. The next one is there any way to license the system so we can validate our direct campaigns for publishers? So you should be able to, we would, like I said, in the Transparency Center, you would be able to subscribe to all of this data and through the APIs. So you can get all of the data into your system and then use that for your campaigns.
And actually that goes to one of the questions I see in the chat as well. What type of endpoints are available, REST or file in the cloud?
Mm-hmm.
Jill, do you want to?
I'm sorry, I missed that one.
Oh, what type of endpoints are available, the APIs, REST or files in the cloud? Yeah,
so coming soon, as Sheila highlighted, is the Transparency Center. And so there we will have the ability for anyone in the industry actually to purchase access to the results of our ads.txt and ads.txt crawler and sort of that aggregated data set. And we will include the notification codes on a, basically for those publishers that sign up, we'll include it on a regular basis. And then for the rest of the industry, Tech Lab is working to make sure that we can fund sort of an ongoing regular analysis. So it definitely won't be as frequent because there's definitely a cost involved with us running this analysis. So we're thinking, maybe a couple times a year that we would update that ongoing notification code for the wider audience. But those codes would be available within the ads.txt and ads.txt endpoints that are associated with the Transparency Center.
And in terms of the REST, it's not exactly a REST API. It's an API that returns your URL to download the full data file. The next question is from Courtney. Does the service offer any suggested language on how to address errors with SSP and seller partners? So I think this
I would
is
actually say, oh.
Yeah, go ahead, Jill.
I would say yes. We tried, and the language that we provide surrounding the notifications has as much as we can directly from the specification. So it's really just helping to reiterate the definition of this is the definition of this type of relationship. Is that the correct relationship? So you as a publisher do need to think through on that, what your relationship is with the seller, but then it also puts that language front and center so that it can be strictly from the specification. You can say, this relationship type is defined as XYZ. I believe, based on a relationship, we are ABC, and then you can start that conversation with your selling partners.
That said, if you feel like you need more help, definitely reach out to us on support@techlab.com, and we'd love to get your feedback as well.
The next is from Kathleen. How can buyers check status correct implementation? Jill, do you want to?
Sure. That would be within, so from a buyer's perspective, that's definitely one of the key use cases of the Transparency Center. So making sure that that data is sort of more publicly available, and that you can sort of check notification codes associated with paths that you regularly purchase from or partners that you use. So that would be, I would say, from the buy side, that the Transparency Center exports those APIs, or you can even, we'll have the data available to browse if you just want to spot check partners for Tech Lab members. So there is an easy way to sort of go in and search a specific domain if you know that you regularly buy from them, and sort of see which see how things are listed there.
Yeah, and just for the usually we don't announce new launches until the day they're actually launched, but for the comfort of this group, Transparency Center is coming very, very soon, like days and within 1 to 2 weeks. So all of this data will be available that we've analyzed. You'll be able to see all of this data there. Next is from Courtney. Once an alert or error is resolved with the seller SSP partner, is there an automatic update in the portal, or is a rescan required? Jill?
It depends on the update. So if it's something that you change within the files themselves, then yes, we do have, it's on the next scan that we would pick up those changes. If it's one of the things that you are checking within the portal and as a publisher, you're approving the way that it's set up, then that one's instantaneous.
The next question is from Jordan Mitchell. Do you have any sense of how often changes are made, seen in Ads.txt and sellers.json files, and why? And perhaps is this a key value prop for this service? So we've not studied that yet, and that information is not easy to get, but we hope that as we run this service, we would be able to get to that data. And the objective is to kind of stabilize to a near zero error and zero alert rate overall. So yeah, that data is not yet available to us. The next question is, publisher names are assigned to a publisher ID every day. Is there a way to keep this data up to date? So this is, I mean, the purpose of this service, that we would be scanning it. The objective is to be able to scan it every day, so we can report these mismatches or differences that are there, and then have the publisher the opportunity to update where they do not find a match. The next question is, when a publisher is listed as intermediary in the sellers.json, does it necessarily mean that on the publisher's ads.txt, the seller should appear as a reseller? That's an interesting question.
So that one, not necessarily. There are valid use cases. I'm going through all. There are valid use cases for publisher intermediary. There's a handful out there, so it's listed within our service as an alert, just to let you know that that's not the most expected result, but that doesn't mean that it's invalid. It's just something that you should review.
Yeah, I think that was the last question from the Q&A, and we are pretty much at time, but I saw like a couple questions on the chat too. The first one is about the fee. Yes, this is a fee-based service that's priced, original price is at $99 a year, and then reduces to half for subsequent year renewals. But we are offering the early 59 discount at $59 a year for the first year. And then does the IAB own the crawler or contract an external company prompt? So we do own the crawler ourselves. I think that is all the questions we had. Thank you everyone for attending and taking the time to this. We will publish the results of the analysis in about a week as a white paper. And as we do this, on a regular, like Jill said, that we do plan to run this for the whole industry at lesser frequency than those who subscribe. And we will come out with the state of the Ads.txt report, most likely on a quarterly basis, so that we can see how we progress and also keep the industry updated on the status of the implementations. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Amit. Thank you, everyone.